Bottomline.
Welcome to the Payments Podcast. I'm your host, Bottomline Managing Editor Owen McDonald. On this episode, we're serving a gourmet feast of subject matter expertise at a drive-through pace. We've got payer verification, A-to-A payments, ISO 20022 for corporates, emerging B2B payment paradigms, and more. To cover this much ground at speed, I am joined by two of our best and brightest. With the North American perspective, I am most pleased to have on the show Jamie DelMedico, Vice President of Product Management at Bottomline. And from the UK, we're delighted to have Richard Ransom, Head of Corporate Solution Consulting for the UK, the EU, APAC, and rest of world. Richard Ransom, Jamie DelMedico, welcome to the Payments Podcast.
Thanks, Owen.
Thanks for having us.
So glad you could be here. I apologize in advance. Many of my questions are actually two questions in one. I know we have the brain power here to handle it. Starting with you, Richard. We're seeing the UK and the EU crack down on fraud using confirmation of payee and verification of payee, respectively. COP is live in the UK now. VOP comes to the EU next year. Is payer verification a kind of silver bullet business payment security, or more like another highly effective layer, Richard?
So payer verification isn't a silver bullet, but it is a major step forward and has the potential to significantly reduce payment-related fraud. For the ability to confirm account ownership and whether the account is a business or personal will really help fight against bad external and internal actors, and also against costly reputational mistakes.
What do you say, Jamie? Payer verification, last word in cybersecurity next year?
No, I think Richard nailed it. I think payer and vendor verification is really, really important in stopping fraud. I think everyone's under extreme pressure from a reputational and regulatory perspective around AML KYC. But I fully agree with Richard in that these tools are one piece in a layered approach to reducing fraud and improving verifications. And you can't just rely on the single source for KYC, AML, OFAC checks. You've got to layer it together with a lot of other capabilities in order for it to be effective.
And Jamie, while I've got you, I want to ask about your broader outlook on fraud trends next year, and I'd like you to start with AI, if that's okay. In your view, does generative AI help or hurt with lowering fraud in the near term?
Well, I think generative AI is key to conducting fraud. We've seen that across the industry. So that is for sure. However, generative AI is also really, really, really important for preventing fraud. And again, it's not a single solution. It does require layering with many other services to be effective. So for example, tons of capabilities out there for analyzing large data sets with a single API call to detect fraud in real time, for detecting bot activity on a digital platform, and then requiring, again, incremental layers of security above and beyond that bot activity prevention, things like MFA and other tools that sort of layer on top of AI to prevent that fraud. So I do think that, all of these things need to be layered together, and it's not a single source of the truth.
Richard, you recently told me that account-to-account or A-to-A payments are one method about to undergo a big B2B growth boom. Why are you such an account-to-account enthusiast?
So account-to-account payments across both established and newly minted national and regional payment infrastructures offer a regulator-friendly way to disintermediate the traditional card networks and their unpopular costs from the B2B payment process.
Right.
So this should mean immediate settlement and lower fees for payments with less mouths to feed in the process. So don't include the card processor network, just including a fee from one bank account to another. But for account-to-account to really compete with cards, the real-time rails and banks need to support accept and reject times, which are equivalent to card. So today in the UK, up to 2 hours for an acceptance, and that doesn't work in a retail environment, neither e-commerce nor actually in a shop in front of in front of a customer.
Right.
So those things need to be fixed, because that sort of finality of payment is the thing that makes account to account really interesting for merchants. But the merchants have got to want to offer it. There has to be a business case versus accepted payment methods, and the payers have to accept that's a way to pay.
Well, sort of similarly along those lines, new digital payment forms, even workhorse solutions like virtual card. How do you see these reshaping next year?
Card is an interesting one in the UK, potentially due to our migration to ACH away from B2B check payments over the last 10 years. In fact, only 1% of business payments were made by check in 2023 in the UK. So the space for card may have been missed because card use has been declining in B2B in UK since its peak in 2016. So cards are 13% of the volume of payments in the UK for businesses, but only 1% of the value. North America is a very different market with high growth in virtual cards predicted over the next 5 or so years. So I wonder if we'll start to see a pickup again as virtual cards with their links to API. It's a much more technology friendly way of serving an account, a one-off card account to a customer. So that's my interest. I wonder if the UK will actually start to pick up use once virtual cards become more widespread.
Jamie, I wouldn't be surprised if you agree to some extent. Do you? And what would you add to what Richard just said? What payment trends are you prioritizing?
I do agree with what Richard said. I will say, the US is pretty far behind the UK and Europe as it relates to digital payments. We still do see a lot of B2B payments going via check today. However, we've certainly seen ACH and virtual card really started to take that share away from checks. So with virtual card, obviously there's a huge benefit to merchants and vendors accepting virtual card in the form of faster payment and clearing, a rebate back to the issuer and payer, which obviously the payment networks love and the payer loves, and then certainly remittance information that does ride along with those payments. So that has major benefit to both payers and vendors. In terms of ACH, we have seen ACH as of late actually taking some share away from virtual card. So we're seeing ACH become a more favorable route to go, just given the lower cost, similar to virtual card. We do have the ability to clear ACH payments quickly. And with, as an example, our Bottomline pay mode premium ACH offering, a lot of rich remittance detail also rides along with those payments to the tune of, invoice information, store numbers, SKU level detail. And similar to the card offering, many payers and vendors have appreciated not only the features that come along with premium ACH, but also the fact that premium ACH is eligible for a rebate similar to virtual card. So we've seen fairly substantial growth on our premium ACH offering over the years. And again, both virtual card and premium ACH are taking substantial share in the US away from check, which is what we all want to see. We all want to see more payments going digitally to reduce fraud, increase speed, and ultimately provide all the remittance information that's necessary to reconcile a transaction.
Right, you are. I'm going to stick with you for a second, Jamie. As an industry, we are nothing if we don't have unbreakable data security. That has not necessarily been the case. How is 2025 shaping up vis-a-vis protecting corporate banking data as more APIs are added to corporate payment systems and ERPs every day? For example, how can onboarding into new systems help mitigate data fraud downstream? These types of considerations, data considerations.
Well, certainly data protection is always top of mind when we're running a business payments network like we run here at Bottomline. We have seen increases in all types of fraud across the industry, social engineering, email spoofing, and really, again, it goes back to the conversation we started on, which is a layered approach to preventing fraud is required in order to protect against these types of fraud. And that means not only having, again, going back, the KYC, AML capabilities in place, but then layering on things like two-factor authentication at the time of changing account information, for example, or tokenization of account information that sits within our systems to mask that account and routing information for both a payer and a vendor in that scenario. And importantly, as you're onboarding customers, again, whether they're on the payer side, accounts payable, or on the vendor side, accounts receivable, going through pretty rigorous onboarding activities that include the right level of control around setting up the right permissions for each individual user at that payer or that vendor, adding in, again, all the account verification components that are required to make sure we're not going to see an account takeover type activity. And then again, as permissioned users are making changes to an account, ensuring that you have layers of security on top of that change to ensure that you're not going to be subject to one of those social engineering or email spoofing activities, again, that we are seeing prevalent around the industry and that has become easier, back to the generative AI conversation, with the emergence of generative AI on the fraudster end.
Richard, let me flip that a different way for you. Take the data security question and apply it to the UK, the EU, and rest of world businesses. That's not a big ask, is it? Corporates are wrangling countless APIs, cross-border payments, instant payments, but that expansion is happening in the midst of a global fraud crime wave, right? So how can we expand B2B payments more securely next year?
So Jamie hit the nail on the head with lots of his points there, but to answer your question, we're seeing a few trends here. A move away from fragmented technology, so concentrating integration in fewer platforms using payment or cash management hubs is helping to reduce risk and increase security and control. So moving from having connections to 3 of your banks over API, SFTP, and host to host, and trying to concentrate that down to one connection, one hub, one area of control. And I think another area, and Jamie talked about this, is around that vendor data. So payer verification, if added at point of input of bank account data into an ERP or payment screen, becomes a very visible deterrent to fraudulent activity. So insiders less likely to commit a fraud if they know there are checks in place to stop them doing it. So a very visible deterrent, just having that payer verification in a couple of fields. And to echo something that Jamie said, a new trend we're seeing in our mature ACH B2B world, where over the past 10 to 15 years, supplier and employee bank account data was held in ERPs and payroll systems and biller systems. We're starting to see organizations looking at how they can tokenize that data and keep it out of those systems and into appropriate secure environments. And this is going to remove a lot of the risk and regulatory burdens of handling sensitive data away from the enterprise. And if you look at things like GDPR across Europe and the UK and other data protection rules globally, these become very tricky areas for people to manage inside an enterprise. It's not their area of expertise, but just having the risk of someone finding out some personal identifiable data from ERP data, because typically expenses are paid via an ERP, that's going to be a really big change. Now, this is something that's kind of happened in US already, and in that world of the moving later away from checks has kind of helped that. So I think we're going to see a shift of that account data out of ERP and payroll systems and billing systems into some more secure places.
Jamie, back to you. Instant irrevocable real-time payments are great. We can all agree with that. But they are no threat to the volume of ACH, as you were mentioning a moment ago. FedNow, it's been live since summer of 23. RTP from the clearinghouse, live since 2017. No threat to ACH in either case, or combined, frankly. The big push there with Instant seems to be in B2C. I don't get the same sense of urgency in B2B. Why is B2B apparently going slower with Instant adoption, Jamie?
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at the use case for real-time payments, the C2B use case for, hey, I need to pay my bill, I need to pay my telco bill, and I need to pay it on time to avoid a $30 late fee. That's a really great use case for real-time payments. Similarly, P2P payments. I want to get money to my family, or I want to get money to my friends quickly, and I want it to show up in their account instantaneously to pay for the dinner that we just had together. That's a great use case for real-time payments. And Owen, to your point, FedNow is sort of ramping. We saw slower adoption of TCH, but FedNow, we're going to see FedNow sort of permeate the long tail of financial institutions in the US, again, more from a consumer use case perspective. In the B2B world, to your point, real-time payments haven't quite taken off. If you think about B2B payments and requirements for B2B payments, oftentimes those payments come with a 30, 60, 90-day term where organizations are planning far ahead for those payments. And the real-time nature of those payments isn't necessarily required to facilitate a B2B payment. So we are keeping a very close eye on both FedNow and TCH as an option for faster payments in the B2B world. I don't expect 2025 to be hyper growth in the real-time payment space in the B2B world.
Richard, what's your take on this? And how long until real-time scales as a global business payment solution? What challenges will that present for AP processes especially?
Yeah, these are really good questions. And there's always been an assumption that immediacy of payment will be the key ask in B2B. So just to echo Jamie's responses again. So there are definite use cases where an immediate payment wins over traditionally slower ACH payment or check. And in the business world, that might be urgent supply payments, welfare payments to employees, expenses, and we've seen a trend towards paying temporary workers. So people who work for a week, you pay them on the last day of their work. They have to turn up to get paid. And in the UK, we've had a near real-time payment service accessible to corporates for nearly 16 years. But in that time, B2B payments, especially for mid-tier and larger corporates, have not migrated en masse. So even when the price point started to converge in multi-day ACH, people weren't moving. So we know from our corporate customers that a significant number of payments are sent in bulk and are agreed in advance, as Jamie alluded to, typically to align with payment terms or salary dates. And, interesting, I spoke to an AP manager recently who said that if they had to make an urgent payment, then something has gone wrong in their process. And in extreme circumstances, potentially it's an indicator of fraud. So that's a really interesting point as well. So if someone asks for something to be done immediately, they think something's gone wrong. So all planned, all scheduled, carefully managed working capital doesn't suit an immediate payment. And the 3-day or 2-day process is absolutely fine. It's low cost, but very high care and reliable.
Will it at some point, or it's unknowable? I'm just curious.
Yeah, and so what looks like will happen, and certainly we're seeing when new payment systems are built globally, that they kind of leave out the slower rail. So everything gets built on a real-time rail. And talking to customers and seeing, looking in my crystal ball, we're seeing that the common payment rails will come adapted with a next day or a same day or a 2-day option to help those sort of businesses who like bulk payments to continue to do that at a cost that suits them.
I'm going to stay with you for a minute, Richard, and kick off this one. We're facing major technical deadlines for payments in the US and rest of world in 25. The whale is ISO 20022. What are some implementation challenges for corporates particularly, and also their commercial banking partners? This we know is an urgent issue, unlike instant payments. So what do you think about that?
ISO 20022 is the major implementation challenge for banks and FIs at the moment, with SWIFT, Fed, UK RCGS, amongst payment systems moving to the standard across the world. And for corporates, the situation is more complicated. For SWIFT, for example, there's no requirement for corporates to adopt the standard from their point of view. So SWIFT aren't saying you must move by November 2025 or whatever the date ends up being as we get closer to that. But there can be a downstream impact on the corporate depending on bank requirements. So looking at the banks that serve corporates, we're seeing a number of different approaches, mostly to handle the requirements for more structured information like address or legal entity identifier or purpose code in the data. So what we're seeing is some banks are moving the corporate to bank message format to ISO. So they're saying to their corporates, SWIFT aren't saying you've got to move, your central payment system isn't saying you've got to move, but we're saying you've got to move to ISO. And that might be the PAIN format, which is the typical corporate to bank format, but also we've seen banks saying, can you put your data in PAX format for us? So that then using PAIN or PAX, they get to create an ISO 20022 native payment journey all the way through the bank. So if you've invested heavily in ISO as a bank, your architecture will be built around that format and the fact that the XML makes it easier to store and use data. But what we're also seeing is that banks are just saying, right, we're still going to keep our proprietary host-to-host format, but we're just going to add loads more fields to it to match the requirements. And in either case, we're seeing enterprises looking to insulate themselves from the changes today, with transformation services sitting in solutions between the ERP and the bank. So a lot of our customers ask us about ISO, and they're not looking necessarily to embrace it. They're just looking at the risk and the project and when they've got to start spending money on it. Over time, more will see the benefit. We'll see more of that enhanced data and more remittance data passing between organizations when they're doing trade. But at the moment, what we are feeling from the corporates is we don't know what we're doing. We don't think we need to do it yet. We're not going to be able to take advantage of any of the new stuff that's in there. How do we insulate ourselves from this? How do we continue to churn out the same old file format that our 20-year-old ERP has been churning out, and also meet the requirements of the banks, and then the banks meet the requirements of the regulators?
That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of that. Jamie, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, the US is preparing for ISO 20022. Most US financial institutions want to be able to send cross-border payments leveraging the SWIFT network. And so they're preparing for that with adoption of ISO 20022. So it is imminent in the USA. I should also mention that the real-time networks, both TCH and FedNow, are leveraging the ISO 20022 framework. So again, these payment rails aren't yet ubiquitous for B2B payments, but I do expect ISO to gain traction in the US. And then maybe last but not least, blockchains are increasingly leveraging the ISO 20022 framework to be able to facilitate cross-border payments, either be it with cryptocurrency or CBDCs, to streamline those cross-border transactions. So as that begins to take off, I do see many, many use cases for ISO here in the US. It's just a matter of speed, really, for me.
Okay, fair enough. Last question. Let's get a quick closing prognostication about 2025 from each of our guests. You guests get one. Jamie, what's going to be the big headline in payments next year?
So I think in the US, I think the big headline is going to be, again, the continued migration away from check and more towards things like virtual card and or premium ACH as a payment offering, just given the value of those services, the reduction in fraud, the speed of those transactions. I think that we're going to see a major shift in 2025 in reducing our current volume of checks.
Richard, now to you. Would you kindly predict the number one payments trend of 2025?
So I think account to account is going to be grabbing the headlines. It's going to be really interesting to see how the card world reacts, because this is disintermediation. This is taking them out of that four-corner model. So expect the large processors and networks to have an answer next year for it. And whether they invest heavily in the space or not is the really interesting thing for me.
There you have it. Summing up an excellent episode, I'm reminded of something Warren Buffett said, quote, "Rule number one is never lose money. Rule number two is never forget rule number one," unquote. Immense thanks to Bottomline's Richard Ransom and Jamie DelMedico for their wonderful insights. To the best audience in B2B payments, our audience, thanks for listening. Hit subscribe. Catch us again on your favorite podcast platforms, including Apple and Spotify. Bye for now.
The Payments Podcast from Bottomline.